Hi, welcome to a scholarly Physionic video. So this video is going to be quite long, but as with all of my longer videos, there will be a menu system that you can skip around to different sections. Today we're going to be covering the topic of sarcopenia. So we will be defining what sarcopenia is. We will go into how it occurs, why it occurs, as well as at what rate it occurs, and if we can prevent it, because in a manner of speaking, it is a disease that we all undergo. So if that sounds interesting to you, if you'd like to know about sarcopenia in a literature-based, science-based fashion with all of my peer-reviewed sources linked below in the article, then stick around. Let's get started. So to start, what is sarcopenia? In most basic terms, sarcopenia is simply the loss of muscle and strength, congruent strength, due to aging. That's it. That's all it is. And some people characterize it as a disease, and other people characterize it as something that just naturally happens. It impacts the body in a few key ways, in many ways in reality, but in three key ways. One is, of course, the loss in strength. So if you lose muscle, if you lose a significant amount of muscle, of course you're going to lose a certain amount of strength, and we'll go over exact numbers a little bit later. But another aspect is metabolism. If we lose a bunch of muscle, again, because muscle is such a metabolically active tissue, of course you're going to see a quite significant decrease in our metabolism. And the final point that I wanted to touch on is the decrease in VO2 max, so basically our ventilatory capacity, so the ability for our body to take in oxygen. VO2 max is actually quite closely related to mortality, so if you've got a higher VO2 max, you have a lower, in principle, you have a lower level or risk of mortality. So if we have a decrease in muscle mass, then because muscle is metabolically active, then metabolism uses oxygen to create energy. So in that case, then we see a decrease in muscle, decrease in metabolism, and then of course we see a subsequent decrease in our ventilation and our use of oxygen. So in those three key ways, we see a decrease due to sarcopenia. Okay, so how quickly does all this occur, which is probably one of the more interesting areas for a lot of people. Well, it actually starts at age 30, already at age 30, and from about ages 30 to 50, we see about a loss of 1% of our muscle mass per year. So it might not come off as much initially, but of course over the years you see certainly a significant decrease. And then from ages 50 onwards, that rate actually doubles. We see about a 2% loss in muscle mass per year. However, how does that translate to strength? From ages 30 to 50, we see a decrease of about 0.8 to 2%, maybe even a little bit higher than 2% in strength loss per year. And then from ages 50 onwards, we see a decrease in strength of even up to 5%. So that is a significant decrease per year that we see, and that can have massive effects on again, that metabolism, VO2 functioning, just being able to walk, all these different areas. Okay, so probably the most scientific aspect of this video is the reasons why any of this occurs. Why does sarcopenia occur, other than just saying, well, the aging process? What about the aging process? What makes sarcopenia occur? So one of those reasons is an obvious one, a lack of physical activity. Of course, you know, when we're younger, we're far more active, we don't have as many ailments, we don't have as many issues, and without making a conscious effort to continue that physical activity, that is going to have detrimental impact on our musculature, but specifically our type 2 fibers. So we're talking about type 2 fast twitch glycolytic fibers, whatever characterization you want to use to characterize those fibers. We're talking about power, we're talking about strength, those strength fibers, not so much the endurance fibers, because technically in all reality we still use those from day to day. I mean, walking, if I get up and walk, the getting up process is going to be using a lot of type 2 fibers, but actually walking, which will be the length of that physical activity, will be mostly type 1 fibers, those slow twitch oxidative fibers, red fibers, whatever characterization you want to use. So the loss of those type 2 fibers, the decrease, the atrophy in the size and the functionality of those type 2 fibers due to a lack of physical activity is certainly prevalent when it comes to sarcopenia and really the entire aging process. Now, another aspect, however, that's related to the musculature or directly related to the musculature is protein metabolism. So we become more anabolically resistant. So it's less, let's say at age around 20 something or even younger than that, we see about an even level of protein synthesis to degradation. So protein synthesis being the creation of protein, the creation of muscle, and then degradation being the catabolism, the loss of muscle. Now, at age maybe even younger, in your teens, your protein synthesis is a little higher just normally than your protein degradation, but around age 20 something, it's about even, which is normal. That's a good thing to have. And then if you exercise, your protein synthesis for short periods of time increases, and then eventually you just slowly build muscle. Now, however, as we get older, 30, 40, 50, 60, that degradation level and that protein synthesis actually decreases a little bit and degradation increases a little bit. So we see kind of a disjunct between a higher level of protein degradation, a loss of muscle, and this is very small, this is very tiny, but over time, of course, day by day, week by week, month by month, and year by year, you see a decrease overall of that musculature. And if we talk about a little bit about hormones, then we can also talk about insulin, for example. We become a little bit more insulin resistant. That goes along with that lack of physical activity, but it also just happens with age. So insulin resistance, and then we have a decrease in testosterone, which might not be much of an impact when we're 30, 40, 50, but later on in life it certainly could have an impact, depending, of course, where you start. And then growth hormone, which is a very, very necessary hormone that occurs when we have protein synthesis occurring, so protein metabolism. And on the flip side, I'd like to also quick mention another hormone by the name of cortisol. I'm sure you've probably heard of it, but cortisol is chronically elevated, so continuously over long periods of time it's elevated in elderly population. Now, we're not talking about like just massive amounts of cortisol, but just a little bit of an increase due to just general ailments. Again, I mean, you're talking about this aging process. You get 60, 70, 80 years old, you start having arthritis, you start having different issues that you have to deal with, and cortisol is one of those hormones that's secreted during that process. Fourthly, I'd like to mention the neuromuscular connection. So talking about the ability for the nervous system to connect with the musculature. Now, I'm not saying that we completely lose a connection and then we can't move our muscles. That would be paralysis in a manner of speaking, but we do actually see a receding of the axon, so this kind of terminal that connects or allows for the communication between the motor end plate, which is kind of the exterior portion of the myocyte. I don't want to get too technical here, but the muscle cell has an area where the axon, so the end of the neuron, and the muscle can interact, and those have a small, very tiny gap between them where chemicals are spread between the two areas. Now, that gap actually widens as we get older due to, again, I'd probably say due to a lack of physical activity. We see that the body just simply doesn't need to maintain that, and we see a recession. We also see fragmentation of the axon, so again, that end of the neuron, which can lead to less efficient neuromuscular connection. And finally, the last point I wanted to make is to talk about the deletion of mitochondria, DNA deletion of mitochondria. So the damage basically of the mitochondria. And if you've taken a basic biology course, you know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. So that being the case, then if you have less efficient mitochondria, then the overconsumption of food is just going to lead to more fat gain, and of course it's going to contribute at least partly to that reduced metabolic rate. So just kind of threw that in there because I thought it was really cool. That I will say that that's not necessarily true of everyone, but it is true of a majority of people that we see this deletion, DNA deletion in the mitochondria. So I just threw it in there because I don't think anybody else is talking about it. And if you'd like to know more about it, of course, check out the article. It's all free. Check it out below. And finally, I wanted to talk about, is it preventable? Is sarcopenia preventable? And the answer is largely yes. It's a completely different experience if you are not physically active. I've already mentioned this like 3 or 4 times now, but physical activity is a huge part of health, but definitely has a severe impact, a noticeable impact on mitigating sarcopenic effects. So that said, you would want to increase your physical activity, but specifically you'd want to probably focus on training those type 2 fibers. So we're talking about weight training, calisthenics, resistance training of any sort. You'd want to probably implement that about 2-3 times a week to make sure that you're continuing that stress, and that's going to attenuate a lot of those changes that you see in protein metabolism, that you see in the degradation of those type 2 fibers, atrophy, and you'd also see probably some beneficial effects on mitochondria, as well as definitely the neuromuscular junction. So a bunch of different things. Hey, I mean, even a reduction in, or an increase I should say, in growth hormone. So it's going to have massive benefits to do a continuous resistance training protocol. But on top of that, to help with the protein metabolism is making sure that you're consuming enough calories and also making sure that you're consuming enough protein. Both of those are certainly extremely important when it comes to nutrition in general, but when we're coming to an aging process, it might take a little more protein to attenuate that protein synthesis. So if you do go into the gym and weight train, then you're going to want to take maybe even a little more protein than what would be typically recommended for the younger normal population if you're in your 60s and 70s and 80s, or older if you're that lucky, to make sure that you're attenuating that protein synthesis need. And I'd like to throw in one cool study that I looked at that kind of gives us hope, gives us an idea of how remarkable our body truly is. And that is a study, and there have been a few of them actually, but this one in particular is just very clear to me, and I have it again as usual in the article below. But I talk about this study where these 70-year-olds that had been resistance training for quite some time were compared and had their musculature compared in many different aspects to 28-year-old sedentary individuals. So we've got 70 years old and training, resistance training, compared to 28-year-olds that don't resistance train, don't exercise at all. And they actually found a very comparable, it was pretty much the same between the two conditions. So that basically tells you that if you resistance train and probably stick to your nutrition and you're staying on top of things when it comes to physical activity and just your health in general, that you can be in as good a shape, at least from a muscular skeletal standpoint and neuromuscular standpoint, than compared to 28-year-olds that don't exercise. Now, I'm not saying that 28-year-olds shouldn't exercise, they should, certainly, and you would see a better benefit in those 28-year-olds if they exercise, but that's not bad. I mean, think about that. Just shy of 30 years old, I mean, you're probably still pretty springy, pretty peppy, so even if you're sedentary. So I think that's awesome. I think that's really phenomenal to be able to resistance train when you're that much older, 40, 50 years older, and still be able to be with the likes of the youngsters. This is the summary of the video for those of you that need a quick recap. If not, please subscribe and check out the attached article. Alright, and I haven't forgotten about the people that want a overall understanding, a general understanding in a quick, snappy fashion, and that's why the summary section is here, or a recap for those of you that did watch the entire thing. So we talked about sarcopenia, what it was, which is a loss in muscle, loss in strength due to aging. And we also talked about what impact that sarcopenia has throughout the aging process, and that is a decrease in muscle, which leads to a decrease in strength, and then also a decrease in muscle leads to a decrease in metabolism, and a decrease in muscle also leads to a decrease in our ventilatory threshold, our ability to consume oxygen. And the rate of sarcopenia is started around the age 30, where we see a loss in muscle of about 1% per year from age 30 to about age 50. We also see a congruent loss in strength of about 0.8 to about 2%, maybe a little more than 2% per year from age 30 to 50. Then from 50 onwards, however, we see a decrease of 2% in muscle, so a doubling of that rate. And then we also see an increase of even 5%, so up to 5% decrease per year in strength. So pretty massive detriments there. Now, the reasons why sarcopenia occurs, well, I'm not going to go into all of them here, but a loss in muscle fiber size, lack of physical activity, protein metabolism decreases, hormone changes, all kinds of different things like that, neuromuscular changes. We've got a bunch of different things that we talked about. But what you can do, on the other hand, there are things that you can do, and one of them is staying on top of your nutrition, making sure that you're eating enough calories, that you're maintaining your weight, and also that you're eating enough protein. And then with that, very closely knit with that, is a increase in your physical activity, but specifically in resistance training, because sarcopenia has an impact, a strong impact on type 2 fibers, which are most impacted in a benefit through resistance training. So calisthenics, strength training, whatever it is that you decide that you want to do. So stay physically active and stay on top of your nutrition. And that's that. That is the video. That is the scholarly video. It is of course quite long, I know that, but there will be short little breakup videos that you can click on in the future, and hopefully the menu system helps you out. If you did find the information useful, I would certainly appreciate it if you liked, subscribed, and shared the video. It certainly means quite a bit to me, because I do put quite a bit of work into these. I've got all my peer-reviewed resources, all my peer-reviewed sources, I should say, and an article that I've written down below. I also go into more detail in that article on everything that I spoke about in the video. So that is that. I hope that you have an awesome day, and I will see you in the next